That's
You mean I was dead before this?
okay.
Took away the gavel. That's okay, I'm sure I don't need it. Well,
There's usually two of them, and I don't see one.
For what's that?
Yeah, but it's missing.
Is it in the thing behind you? That locked?
There it is.
both of them are here.
Okay. I never even thought to look in there. When I didn't see it back here, I thought it would be out on the table.
It's that Mayor Finn playing tricks again.
Well, the council is, Lindbergh's missing too, Lindbergh's missing too, so I don't know.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order, so she doesn't have to sit down and stand up again. Call to order the June 11th meeting of the Planning Commission, starting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Okay, Tel Jensen. Sharon Watts.
Present.
Paula Bosell.
Present.
Connie Taylor. Here. Jean Jones.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't know the guy out there.
Seeing as how there's no public, I guess we are not going to have any citizen communication. So we will go on to the approval of the minutes from April 19th, 2018. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Have a second?
I'll second it.
That was Paula.
Yes.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any
So Paula,
comments?
my understanding your term's up, so what's the status?
It's not up until they tell me it's up.
So, 3 applications were received, and Mayor Finn is going to be bringing a recommendation forward to the city council. And the city council would have to take a vote to make the nomination. So, I'm not
Wasn't it,
sure-
I had a city council meeting where the mayor thanked the people that were going off council and planning commission for their service and said goodbye?
I don't remember. Sorry, I was at the last meeting and I don't remember that.
End of May?
Oh, I think he was
Second
saying-
meeting in May?
I think he was saying that to,
I thought Paula's name was on that list. That's how I knew that.
oh,
Well, how can, I mean, if her term's expired and she's not been appointed again, doesn't that, this would invalidate this meeting?
I think her appointments end at the end of this month,
No, May
end
25th.
of last month.
Yes.
I don't know, that's a good question.
I mean, it will invalidate the meeting.
Where did you,
I can go sit in.
Her vote, it might be her vote.
Well, she can't sit up here as a
So-
sitting commissioner.
how do we know, so where'd the May 25th date come from?
I'm sorry?
It was
Where
on
did
the
this
city
May
council
25th?
agenda.
I think it goes to when the last person was appointed. Yeah, I don't know, 25th seems like an odd date, doesn't it? I mean, why isn't it the first or the last of a month? I don't know.
It has to do with if they filled out a term when
Right,
that person
so when
left.
that person left, yeah.
So you might be right, Paula, you may need to sit in the audience, and
Okay.
sorry about that.
What do we know? Is Peter around?
He is in a finance meeting over there, so I can text him. There's no guarantee. Or I can text Mayor Finn. But until it gets announced at a city council and the city council takes action on it, even if it's to continue Paula's appointment, it requires council action.
What did his, when he posted the position, what did it say?
It just requested applicants who were interested in applying. I'm not sure it said anything about when the appointment would occur.
I applied.
What did it say?
That was a long time ago, I don't remember. I know I said some things I shouldn't have said, but that's all right.
Somebody should call Pete or something because
Well, he's texting.
I can't see over that thing, so thanks.
Okay, well, I don't know. So,
See if there's Nancy here. Makes an even number up here, which is not.
Gee, it didn't bother you with our other vacancies, rather than you
Oh,
sat with four on
we
the
were, yeah, we
planning
were four.
commission for a long
We were four
time.
for quite a while.
Oh.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me.
So maybe the fastest thing would be for Paula just to
Get the hell out
go,
of here.
go sit in the audience and have somebody else second the,
Well, if she's
Approve of the
supposed to be here, she should be here.
yes, and she will, and she can stay, she can stay here, but just be, I don't care if she can stay sitting there, and we just need somebody else to second the minutes perhaps, and so we can proceed instead of waiting here.
Sorry about that?
I was just hoping that we could just, proceed and get somebody else to second the minutes.
Yes, even, because with the four of you, you have a quorum.
Yep,
Okay. You want me to sit in the audience then?
I personally don't care.
Where you sit, I don't think makes a difference, but when it comes time for voting
Yeah,
and
Just
making
shut.
motions,
yeah.
But here's the thing, this meeting's being recorded. And by her sitting up here when the meeting's being recorded, it gives the impression that she is
Okay.
a standing member.
So,
this does.
okay.
Go sit in the audience.
So could I have a second for approval of the minute, for consideration of the minutes? Tel has made the motion to consider the minutes.
Well, I have a question on that.
Could we get a second first? And then
Yeah, well,
and
I
then we
can't
get-
second it until I get an answer, so.
I thought the usual procedure was to get the,
You should
get the second and then to
second,
discuss
and
it.
then you can discuss, correct.
Okay, can I second it?
Sure.
Okay, I will second the, okay, Connie, what's your question?
There was mention in the minutes that a point of order was brought up by Connie Taylor regarding time for public comment, and the chair ruled that the point was not correct. Does anybody, Madam Chair, do you recall what that was about?
This meeting that meeting was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. See, that's the problem with not having, you can't see anything, I was going to go back and look.
My recollection is that the point of order had to do with the fact that we had public comment for items on the agenda at the time that they are brought up on the agenda. And I think Travis suggested that the public comments be made after the discussion so the public would have an idea what it was they were talking about. That's my recollection. And then someone said something about that wasn't the way it was done at city council, and that we should be modeled after city council.
And those were the mayor's orders that we be modeled after city council. So,
Yeah, I don't know that I remember ruling that the point was not correct exactly, but
You did,
We moved on.
we moved on, yes.
yeah. Because I said we were instructed by the mayor to follow the city's.
Well, we also have our own procedures that we, okay.
well, this planning commission reports to the mayor.
But we do have our own procedures that we have approved.
Don't we have a letter from the mayor instructing us? I think it was from April of 2017, instructing the planning commission to adapt their procedures to the city council for minutes and the agenda. That was prior to me being on the planning commission, prior to Travis, but I think there's a letter.
There is. I would like the minutes to reflect that, not that I was incorrect, that the issue is unresolved, because it is unresolved.
She did overrule you.
Oh, so does that mean,
That doesn't necessarily mean I said the point was not correct. I think we just tried to move on.
so maybe it should state that the chair overruled Ms. Taylor or something?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you can correct it to just say the chair overruled Ms. Taylor.
All right.
Okay. Do we have anything else to talk about in the minutes? Okay. Yes.
So was that a motion to amend?
Yes,
Minutes.
you're right. That would be a motion to, so we have a motion to amend.
A second?
Did you make a motion?
I thought you made the motion
No,
just now.
I didn't.
He was just asking if there, I would assume, Connie, that you were making, in
I'm
fact.
I
that
thought
we-
Tel was making the motion too.
Right.
He said-
I move that we amend the minutes to reflect a change in language that states that instead of chair ruled that the point was not correct, that the chair overruled Ms. Taylor. Is there,
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to amend the minutes. All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Jensen?
Nay.
Okay. All right, so then can we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I'll move to approve the minutes as amended.
It's already in the motion. So we just
We
have
don't
to
need to
vote.
do it
Here.
again? Okay, okay.
Pass.
I'm sorry, was
The
everyone
motion
done talking
carried
about it?
3-1.
3-1, okay.
All right, so then can we vote to approve the minutes as amended?
I thought that's what I
We
was
just
moving
did, but
for.
we didn't.
No, we voted to amend. We didn't approve the minutes. We
Well,
approved
that
the
was, I
amendment.
seconded what you asked for.
Yeah.
So now we have to vote on the minutes. I
Okay.
believe.
We'll vote on the minutes as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Nay.
Nay.
3-1 again.
Still
Okay.
passes.
So can we move on then to the public hearing? Public hearing on wireless communication facilities.
Yeah, approve the agenda.
Oh, sorry, yes. I always forget about approving the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda as printed.
Do we have a second to approve the agenda?
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Unanimous. All right, public hearing on wire communication facilities. We have a staff report.
do. I guess the first question I would ask is, I prepared a presentation because I've been having communication with 3 different representatives from the wireless community, and they all mentioned that they had a couple suggestions, but assuming they were going to be here and we needed to do a full record for them so they would bring them up to speed. Since they're not here, would you like me to just kind of skip to the potential comments about
Yeah,
the
it's one-
feedback on their comments, or do you want me to go back and just do the full from the beginning?
So I was wondering if there were any comments about this. 'Cause it
So,
wasn't on the-
I'm sorry, Connie, I had put a couple stacks there.
Not any instruction to me, by the way.
Yeah, sorry. Because I wasn't sure who had them and who didn't pick them up. So if you could take a copy if you didn't get them. So we can go through those one by one.
Before we begin that, Mr. Perry has some comments about minutes.
I'm sorry.
You have comments about the minutes?
It sounds like they discussed it, I'll just let the record.
I've got both.
Okay. There are 3 different things?
Okay. So would you like me to do the full presentation, or you want to just discuss, I can walk you through the comments that we received?
Well, are these to be entered into the record?
They are in the record, yes.
Well, they're in the record, but is that what they asked for?
Well, yes, whether they ask for it or not, the fact that they comment on the record means they will be part of the record.
I'm a little confused, Travis. Did they instruct you to enter it into the record?
They don't have to instruct me.
So
Any
you decided?
Any comments they make automatically becomes part
Are
of the
these
record.
SEPA comments?
Well,
You haven't done
No.
SEPA.
SEPA's been done. And the SEPA comment period was part of the notice of application.
And there was a determination of non-significant.
It's a non-project, right?
Yes. And it was determined to be non-significant. That was part of the notice of application that's in your packet. Note 7, or page 7.
So, does anybody have a preference for?
My preference would be that you not restate, do the presentation, but bring us up to date on everything subsequent to that and go into these comments.
So you were talking about redoing the presentation that you had done at the last?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, no, okay. I agree with Connie.
Me too. Me too.
Okay. So, if you go to section 1771, 195, D2C,
Which-
1771,
Which page is that on?
which should be page 13 or 13?
12. I think it's 12.
12. Yes, you're right, sorry.
Site location?
Mm-hmm.
13.
Yeah, 13.
Which 13? There's so many.
At the bottom. Page 5 at the top, page 13.
Okay.
13 of 58.
Thank you.
Yes. So,
And what are we looking at again?
So the issue that was brought up, sorry, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually skip and go to the Word document version. So this came up in one of my conversations with the wireless facilities, or the wireless community. And what we're talking about in this section is the site location, and talking specifically about using utility poles. And C currently says, for placement or replacement in public rights-of-way, auxiliary support equipment shall be mounted within the pole or placed underground. No at-grade support equipment in the right-of-way is permitted. The question that was brought up by one of the pole providers was, can you put it on private property just off-side of the right-of-way? So in other words, if they need to put in a small generator or a piece of equipment, since we don't want it in the right-of-way for potential sidewalk problems or cars crashing into it, are we okay with them putting it immediately on private property and leasing a small space for that? If we are we okay with it looking like a silver utility box, or do we want it camouflage? Do we want it wrapped in one of those
A cactus?
well, some kind of, I was thinking more of the vinyl wraps, or do we want screening? Should it be surrounded by plants or behind a fence or anything like that?
Refresh my memory, how big is the box?
So the boxes, I mean, they could be the size of a mailbox, but as we go forward, you know, they might theoretically become the size of a mailbox.
You just said mailbox.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So a big blue U.S. mailbox where you put your envelopes in versus what you get your newspaper in.
Which in other municipalities are in the right-of-way. I mean, I don't have an objection to it being in the right-of-way. I mean, our right-of-ways are big.
Do you have a preference one way or the other, whether it would be camouflaged, or are you fine with just having more utility boxes?
Depends. Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I like the idea of hiding them one way or another. Camouflage sounds a little, I don't know what that means particularly. Would that,
Camouflage could be a lot of different things.
yeah, would you include, screening it with landscaping to be camouflage, or are you thinking more of like
No,
a pattern
screening.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think my preference would be screening.
Well, I would say that, if you're talking about the kind of larger mailbox, that is pretty large. If you start putting landscaping around it, then you're taking up more of the area of the private property person. I don't know if that's necessarily desirable.
Yeah, but that gets into private entities doing private business with each other.
Yeah.
Well, in many of our newer subdivisions, we have PUD transformers in people's front yards instead of, and they don't lease them because it's a service for the existing house or facility, so it's a right-of-way that's granted in the plat to the PUD. But we oftentimes have telephone equipment, and the city has pump stations and lift stations and all variety of things that they put in the right-of-way. And certainly its preference would be that it was underground, but if it's the size of a transformer, I'd prefer to see it out of any sidewalk, but in the right-of-way, just like our water meters are. just seems even more invasive and more cumbersome for the proposed applicants to have to be running around. Those leases are horrible documents.
I don't think there's anything about this that's saying they have to be on private property. It's saying that if they are on private property, they need to be certain. So it can still be in the right of way if it, is within the pole or underground.
I'm not sure that's what Travis said.
The purpose is to put them on utility and light poles.
Well,
Right.
it is, but we also want them to be done in an attractive manner. And this section is specifically written so that they minimize the amount of impact. So what they would like is permission to put as much equipment in the right-of-way as cheaply as possible. Because theoretically, if they don't have to buy the expensive small stuff, they're not going to. They theoretically, have to recycle the old gear if they can move it to a town that doesn't care. That's kind of why it was written the way it was.
Okay, so if it's in the right of way, are they leasing right of way space from the city?
They would have to get a right-of-way permit, yes.
Okay, does the permit include police, or is that just that they get a permit and it's open?
No, they would get a right-of-way permit, and then depending on whether they have a franchise agreement, then that would govern it. And right now, we don't have a franchise agreement for cellular facilities in the right-of-way.
So Travis, how many of these would you be seeing as you drive through town?
So typically a polygon can be anywhere from 12 to 28. So I've seen them through that. So typically what they will do is they will decide where they want their polygon to occur and do a plan to run a specific route of these things. So they might catch, the important intersections, but it could be as small. So they could theoretically put one on the 4 stoplights at exit 20, or I should say, the 4 corners of exit 21, for example. So those might be the only 4 in town. Or they could run them, 10 up Atlantic and 10 down Pacific. So there's no way of knowing. It's going to depend upon what they actually need for capacity. Because small cell sites are not about coverage, they're about capacity.
So the Davis Wright Tremaine attachments, they don't show anything above ground in any of their examples. They're all mounted on the pole. So is that...
Yes, and T-Mobile has different technology. They are more radio-based. And so what they do is they convert it to radio waves that are transmitted between each other, whereas others are based upon fiber or direct line of sight service.
So save me the search. Which comment raised the issue?
Okay. Actually, I believe this one was a verbal follow-up with Linda Atkins.
So it wasn't in her letter.
What's that?
It wasn't in this communication that she sent.
No, it couldn't have been a verbal write-up with Linda. Sorry, I think it might have been Ken Lyons, who is at the same firm as Meredy Pabst,
Okay.
who is the other one. So the one from Linda Atkins, she works at attorney's office who looks like they represent T-Mobile, and Meredy Pabst works at the Wireless Policy Group, which represents multiple providers. It's more of an industry-related representative. And then the last gentleman, Noah, actually, as far as I can tell, he works for a tower company that installs facilities, not necessarily for an individual provider. Although he has a Verizon email.
Well, I feel like somewhat at a disadvantage. I see some of these were dated June 6th, They weren't included in our package,
They were not.
so it's hard to digest this at this time. I have no objection to, if you look at the T-Mobile on the small device, I don't find that objectionable at all.
The one mounted on the pole?
Yeah.
But you're talking specifically about
Okay.
electricity connections, right? No?
It could be any kind of, ground. Now, that one in that picture is specifically a T-Mobile, and it has radio equipment as well as power equipment, or converter equipment. So the actual power will come through the power that's in the pole itself, just like the light is powered by the internal pole. So typically those would be metered, and then it converts it to radio signals, and so it can receive and send radio signals, so it's got a little bit different equipment. Whereas something like a more typical cellular or small cell panel, it's just an antenna, and then it converts it to fiber, which goes underground and gets transmitted by fiber. So those have a lot different equipment in the pole, and so, or in the panel.
But is the goal to use existing apparatus, for lack of a better term, that's already existing in the city?
So the support structures, the answer to that is yes. We would like them to use as many existing structures like utility poles or buildings as possible, rather than creating new support structures specifically for that purpose.
I favor that.
So if somebody had this issue, I mean, I agree with Sharon that increasing the footprint onto an adjacent piece of property just increases the footprint of it.
Yeah.
And so I like the language, the way you have it. And could someone ask for a variance to the code if they needed to be above grade or at grade?
That's a good question. One of the last sections of this code is actually the variance section, and it talks about what you can get variances for. Sorry, maybe at the bottom of that section.
Travis, I need to ask a question before we go too far. You were talking, did you change the packet that we picked up and add 10 pages? Because I go to page 48 and you distinctly mentioned page 58, and I think,
Yeah, there was a printing error, and I didn't get all the 58s on the front corrected. So it was actually pages 1 through 48 in the packet.
so I have everything that I
We
need.
have everything that was published in the packet.
Except for the correspondence that came through on the table in the back.
That's fine.
in
I
the
just
last
want to be
couple
on the
days.
same page as everybody else, and I did not.
So it is section page 9, page 9 at the top, which would be page 17 at the bottom. And it's section 6, the last one in section F. And it talks about a variance may be requested for the
Oh, there you
standards
go.
of that section, but it specifically has to do with the design standards. And the information that you guys are talking about is development standards, not design standards. So you would not be able to request a variance for that.
But only one of these comment people brought that up.
Well, we'll go through this systematically because there are some other issues that we'll go through. So there's no real more systematic way than going through them one by one.
Can we go at it by talking about the size of this thing? You know, because you said it could vary so much in size.
Well, so there is a section in here which talks about the widest section that an attachment can be would be the pole height or the pole width at the attachment point. So if they are lower on a pole and it's a 12-inch wide pole where they attach to, their equipment can be 4 inches or can be 12 inches. If they're adding to the top of a pole, and when they get to the top of the pole, it's 6 inches wide, then their attachment can be 6 inches wide. Otherwise, what you could get is you could get a long skinny pole that gets to the very top and it's 3 inches wide, and they could put a big bulb at the top, and it would look oversized or out of place, draw more attention that way. So the idea with that standard was to try and make it consistent with the existing pole height, or the pole width.
But aren't we talking here about something that would be on the ground?
Well,
When you say grade, no at-grade support.
yes, no at-grade equipment unless it's in the right-of-way. So, like AT&T, like what you're looking at, that picture that you pointed to, that's their entire box. Other facilities have little skinny antennas, and then the equipment lines go down the middle of the pole, and the actual equipment is in the base.
Why can't they be put in vaults?
Or they could be put in vaults, but they don't tend to want to put them in vaults because they have to do a co-location, and if there's fiber or if there's somebody else's gas utility or water utilities, then they have to keep moving farther and farther away, and the farther it gets, it could degrade signal quality. It also could run their costs up so that it's more expensive. Like I said, their preference would be to just throw a bunch of equipment on the pole, and if it looks crappy, it's the cheapest possible. So that's kind of what we're trying to avoid by this here. So we're using different sections to kind of hem them into the width and the height and where they put their equipment. And this code is specifically written to try and encourage them to replace poles with something that's nice and attractive, brand new, structurally efficient, and that's big enough for their equipment.
So you mentioned earlier that it could be, in today's technology, it could be the size of a commercial mailbox, but you would expect it over time to be the size of a residential mailbox.
Yeah. Yes, because it's already getting smaller.
So couldn't we, would it make any sense to specify a size and make them meet that?
You could pick a number, but I'm worried if we just arbitrarily pick a number that we might be causing problems for ourselves in the future.
Okay.
Right now, it's kind of limited to the width of the pole, so it doesn't create that lollipop effect.
So theoretically, you could have them design a planter box, and it could be in the right-of-way.
Yeah. Or a bench, or a fake mailbox, or a fake fire hydrant, or, yeah.
But the question here is, would you allow a lease of private property outside the right-of-way?
Yes.
And I'm like,
Yeah. To me,
that defeats the whole purpose.
And to me, it makes it more expensive that they would have to pay
Yeah.
somebody to lease a corner of their property, no matter how big it is. It's an additional expense. Whereas you can get a cheap right-of-way permit. You know, you replace a pole once, and it's.
And then you get the benefit of having a more attractive thing for a reasonable cost by not going on private property.
That would seem like the logical economics, but. And so I don't see this as a big issue. Somebody brought it up, so I felt we needed to talk about it. If it's camouflaged, maybe it is fine. My concern is that we kind of hem them in and we set our expectations up front. Otherwise, they'll be in my office nickel and diming me with what if I painted.
What if they just put it underground? I think Sharon's right. I mean, it just adds more to somebody's front yard.
I mean, if that's, there again though, like, we're not requiring that. We're saying, as I understand, we're saying, look, don't put anything at grade that's gonna get in our way. Make it small, put it inside, put it underground. And if you really don't wanna do that, you can hide it on someone's private property, and you're gonna have to pay them. But as
Yeah.
long as we don't have to see it or bump into it, then that's between you and
The
me.
interesting argument that Linda does raise, and that is, if it's a wood pole, you can't put equipment inside of it. And my response was, well, if it's a wood pole, you can find one that works, or replace the wood pole with something modern and structurally sufficient that it would allow you, like in Beaverton where this came up, they had talked about actually replacing it with the cement downtown style ornamental lights. Because, like in the case of, say, downtown, if they wanted to locate one downtown, if there's an old wood pole, our preference would be for them to replace it with the ornamental style that's consistent with the downtown district. Saves the city from having to replace it later. So, you want a prime location, it comes with some responsibilities.
I'm in favor of
Okay.
that.
Mhm.
Let me ask you something. If there's construction and it's in a right-of-way, or if it's on somebody's private property or wherever that let's say a road's going to be widened or you're going to do something, is it incumbent upon them to move that? Because we can't let it interfere with the future plans of our city.
I think it's dependent upon the individual project, but yes, it requires a right-of-way permit, and normally right-of-way permits or right-of-way franchise agreements require movement upon request by the city.
So
It's-
reasonable accommodation, so far, okay.
Now, who pays for it might be another issue. That might depending on who the franchisee is and why it's being moved. So for example, if a development is coming along and we required something to be undergrounded, that might all be the responsibility of the developer to pay for that. Whereas if it's a road project and their pole is in the right of way, it may be their responsibility to move their poles if they want to continue service. So I don't know the franchises well enough to know how that would be handled.
Okay, so where are we with this? We've talked
Okay.
about a lot.
So I understood that you were all happy with the way it was and that you don't feel it needs to be changed.
I am.
I'm fine.
Yep.
No comment? Okay. Okay, so. We had one hanging issue for support structure. It was the definition for support structure. And that was the question of, do you want to make a distinction between single-family and multifamily structures? And there was one comment from, I believe it was Meredith Pabst, who said that it made sense for single, that we not further define that we just leave it as residential purposes.
Does that mean it could go either way? Or does it mean, I'm not sure I'm convinced that having something like that on a single-family residence is, so what is her comment? Would you please explain her comment?
Her comment was that we not make a differentiate between a single family and a multifamily. So the definition we're talking about is support structure means an existing building or other structure to which an antenna is or will be attached including but not limited to buildings, steeples, water towers, and signs. Support structures do not include support towers or any building or structure used for residential purposes.
I'm most comfortable with
Sorry?
the current language. I'd like to keep it out of the residential, so I'm comfortable with the current language.
Okay.
Why don't we want these on residential buildings?
Well, I don't know that you want it on a single-family house.
Why not?
Well, I don't want the wireless company to come and build a single-family house in my neighborhood and decide that that's where they want to put the wireless tower. For one reason, doesn't go to ownership and being a member of the community.
That's a really
Unlikely.
interesting point.
But
I mean, I think we kind of had that with the marijuana initiative. A lot of unforeseen results.
Okay, so that's a really interesting question. Because we do talk about our priorities for what zone we want them in. And pretty consistently, residential is at the bottom of that list. Now, the other chart that we talk about, and that is what kind of process would you go through? And residential districts pretty consistently require a public hearing and a conditional use permit. So there are barriers to that happening, but it seems like a pretty sneaky way for them to try and propose something that we might not necessarily want. But I don't know, do we want to worry about that now or wait until one actually tries to come through?
So why would they want to put it on a residential structure versus, let's say, a streetlight that's, right there?
So if we had a 3 or 4 story apartment building around Horseshoe Lake, they might be able to get a significant area of coverage on the top of a 3-story apartment building. You could get all of Horseshoe Lake and potentially parts of I-5 maybe.
But that could be addressed at a later date.
Through the permitting process, yes.
Well, it depends on what the revenue is to the landowner. And if you have a good-sized building, you could probably put a lot of towers or a lot of masts on it.
Yes, and under our code, you could take an existing structure and add up to 20 feet to it. So if you were talking about a hypothetical apartment building on Horseshoe Lake, it could be 3 or 4 stories with an additional 20 feet of antenna on top of it.
Multiple antennas?
that's in this code? Or that's in the...
Yes, in this case. Now, the way it's written, that would not be allowed right now because it would be on top of a residential structure. But the way the code is written, so if they were replacing a street light, they could add additional height to accommodate a antenna on the top of a light pole. Like the pictures you were flipping through. Typically, they don't go super high. The other just made me think of something. Small cell towers, which is really what we're talking about here, they have very limited service range, so they don't actually want to go higher because the higher it goes, the worse the signal would be. So
Is
they
it
may-
1,000 feet?
No, more like 200 feet. So I mean, they are like true small cell, small location, intersection-driven, maybe high school parking lot driven. You literally need to have enough capacity in the high school parking lot. They might put them on the top of the lights.
Are they limited in their radio frequency? Can they go larger than 200 feet? Why do I think it's 1,000 feet?
I'm not sure where the 1,000 feet comes from, and that might be more of a traditional cell tower, in which case to get additional height is really important because they're looking for coverage, whereas small cells are about capacity. long as you can cover the high school and the Walmart parking lot, that would be kind of the purpose of a small cell site at the north
So
end. of
that's what you mean by capacity.
Yes,
So you have a targeted,
yes. So when you have 400 kids walking out of the school and they're all on the phone at the same time, they're not slowing each other down. And as they work their way out through the neighborhood, the more traditional cell coverage or Wi-Fi will pick them up from spot to spot as they disperse and out.
But there's nothing, I mean, as I read it, there's nothing in the code that is differentiating
Between what?
between those two types of service, right? Like, so you could look at this code and
No,
say,
there isn't.
It's a wireless communication facility. It's not the small cell that we're writing this thinking of, but it is still a wireless communications facility. And it's 20-foot tall tower, on the top of the Lions Club or something.
So if you look at Meredith Pabst's email, there are some sections in there, but there were a couple clarifications that I made based upon Meredith's comments. They are... Actually, it is the table. The table's 1771-195-1. And if you take a look at the board up here, I recommended adding a footnote number 4, which talks about small cell nodes on city-owned structures and poles. And that footnote would apply in this column right here, which is the regulation that applies to new attached facilities on existing structures. So what that says is our priority for administrative reviews is, so in other words, we want to make it as easy as possible for people to locate on city-owned utility poles in a manner that's consistent with our ordinance. It would be an administrative approval. No public hearing, no public notice. So it's kind of the easiest path to the finish line is consistent with city code and dealing with the city in the right of way. So that way we don't have to inconvenience or burden as many of our citizens with leases and discussions about that.
Does this preclude PUD on utility poles?
No. Our preference would be city-owned, but I don't know how many we actually own. No.
And I'm like, is this prejudicial? I mean, are you reserving this lease income to the city and excluding other utility services who own poles in the right-of-way?
Not excluding, but our preference would be that the city...
Doesn't that seem like not fair trade? No?
No, I don't think it
Well, I wonder how it seems to the other utility services.
Well, yeah. I'm sure the utilities companies are going to say, yes, we are absolutely competing against them for their revenue. My preference would be not to have to further burden taxes because there is a utility stream for using structures. Because we're maintaining those poles, shouldn't we receive some of the revenue to help maintain those poles?
You get a city utility tax already.
Yes.
How many times do you want to, exclude somebody else from the business?
well, I mean, getting revenue into the city to lessen the impact on the taxpayers at the expense of the utility, where
Where does the
they-
revenue go? Does it go to the general fund?
I would assume so. I don't know where franchise agreement money goes. Right-of-way permit money goes to Public Works through the general fund.
Is there a rate chart? Well, what do you, I mean, who's going to set the lease field fee?
IUD permit fees are all set by city council, including right-of-way permits.
Yes, and I don't know how the city deals with revenue for utilities, like for the PUD to be in our right-of-way. I don't know if they pay a rate or whether they can use as much of it as they want and they just have to pay a tax percentage.
Typically, PUD gets their own easement.
What's that?
Typically, PUD gets their own easement. Or as the PUD would say, we're never going to rely on the city of Woodland for a right-of-way. They're going to get their own from the developer.
Yeah, yeah, and so they may pay somebody for a right-of-way, and then, yeah, they could lease it out a dozen times and receive the income instead of the property owner, yeah, could do that. Which is kind of what you're talking about for the public right-of-way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, so what you're saying, suggesting is, in order of priority, it would put them on city-owned poles first.
Well, yes, that's true. There's also an order of priority for location for zoning, which is not necessarily the same thing. There's also a prioritization for using existing facilities, then using new facilities on existing structures, and then there's the very last choice is new towers, new structures altogether. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, any recommendation on changes to allowing towers on residential structures? Or, sorry, allowing facilities on residential structures?
Currently, that's not allowed.
Currently,
I'm
as
comfortable with
proposed.
that. That's the way I'd like to keep it for now.
It seems like especially downtown where we're trying to encourage some mixed-use development, it seems like it would preclude a lot of buildings downtown that you could put these facilities on really inconspicuously without any adverse effect to the community.
Yeah.
So, I think
So if it's a multi-use building, is it considered?
it is used for residential purposes. If it has housing, it's used for residential purposes too. So my reading of this would say
Yeah,
if
okay,
it has any residences in the building, then that pulls it out. It says no, can't do it.
And
That doesn't seem like a huge deal, but it doesn't seem like a great idea either.
And I also needed to point out that the exemption section at the very start does exempt some residential facilities that wouldn't even be covered under this ordinance. So for example, if you were a ham operator, a ham radio operator, you could put up an antenna and it wouldn't be considered part of this ordinance. You could, so you wouldn't be affecting those. Also, roof-mounted antennas for residential purposes, so whether you're talking dish TV and those kind of things, even the older models, I believe it's up to 15 feet or less in size. So those would be exempt because theoretically there may be some out and around. And also, exemption H is for small antennas that are a meter or smaller that might be associated with like a home business. So if you did meter reading for a living or something out of your home office, those would also not be affected by this ordinance. So there are some exceptions where people could still have,
But the scale is considerably smaller.
yes, yes,
I mean, that's the issue.
yes. So even when the definition says not on residential structures, there is a little bit of cheat room because there are some people who might have legitimate residential facilities and they wouldn't be caught up in that prohibition.
So the answer to the question for me is, yes, we do want to make a distinction between single-family and multifamily.
I agree.
And I think I would say that not only is it multifamily, it would be some higher density of multifamily. So it wouldn't be a duplex, it might not be a fourplex, but if it was a sixplex or, 50 units or something.
So would you maybe,
And our code's that way. We have single family, or we have residential, and then we have multifamily, high and medium.
Right.
So it would seem like we would go in the multifamily zone, maybe.
And maybe high density.
Yeah.
I still don't understand why we don't want these in residential areas.
why we don't, or?
Yeah, why? I mean, if we're talking about, their form, if we're regulating their form and what they look like, what is the issue with having them in the residential area?
It's my understanding that it's not that, it's on single-family residences. You can still have coverage through right-of-way and other avenues, it's just not on a single-family residence.
I understand that. Why don't we want it on a single-family residence?
So, what the ordinance is currently set up to do, and that is, you would have them down Gun Club Road in the right-of-way on utility poles. What you
Right.
wouldn't have is neighbors with stuff on their roof doing dueling service agreements and...
Which becomes
transactions.
commercial.
That's why.
So,
I don't follow. I mean, I get we want them in the right-of-way because then that's a little bit of, we get somebody else paying for our utility poles, which sounds great to me. I like that idea. And we get a little bit of, maybe they'll get revenue,
Well-
but if somebody wants to,
and there are other reasons than just that. That was the one I brought up. But theoretically, if there's a car accident and that pole gets knocked down, then they can go out there and repair it because it's in the right-of-way and there's an easement. Or if there's a pole that's knocked down and we need to flip off the power, that would be part of the city's responsibility. If it was on a house and there was a service problem and they couldn't contact somebody, or, there's no guarantee that you would be able to get up to do the maintenance or abate safety issues on a private property, because, if they're based out of Phoenix and they have a facility on a house and the fire department knows that there's a garage fire at the other end of the house, they don't necessarily have the right to go in and flip off the power or do some kind of interruption to prevent the spread of the fire. I mean, there's all kinds of safety reasons for...
And there's aesthetic reasons too. And many of these homes belong to homeowners associations, and they're not necessarily particularly, some of them can be unsightly. And
Right,
that
well-
affects the other neighbors.
right,
There's-
but what we're talking about making them, we're talking about them in the right-of-way, we don't want them to be outside, but we could do the same thing if they're on private property. There's nothing that precludes.
I think you're making this far more difficult than it needs to be.
So why would they want to put it on a private residence where they'd have to pay, like a rental or something versus right away and just do the permittal?
Well, I guess my thought is that we're all looking at this is that this is Singular that's coming along and wants to put in a tower. And I'm like, well, what if Joe Blow wants to generate his own signal out of her house, because it's really a radio frequency tower. Some of it has to go with radio frequency waves, and, do I want them beaming into the house next door to me or beaming out of the house next door to me? I think it's preservation of the community.
But
Is
you're okay
put
with
it in
that
the right of way.
multifamily?
I'm not okay with it, but I think that because of the prioritization of where we locate them.
So if you're concerned about people, so first of all, we can't consider RF frequency impacts to human beings as part of this. That's the law. But assuming that was your concern, then I would think you'd be less interested in a high-density area where there are going to be more people exposed to it. single family.
Well, it's a lower priority in a residential zone, period. In the commercial zone, where we have some residential, but we haven't changed that code, so there isn't a lot of residential. It's only by special use permit, or binding site plan, I guess. I'm not as concerned about it happening, yeah. But I think the invasion into the residential community, that we have the right of way and we have the power of the government regulating it instead of the power of the individual, the one house in the neighborhood doing something that the other houses in the neighborhood are left to be told, well, I can do this, it's my right to. And I'm like, let's just leave that out of the equation.
That's where I'm coming from. The way it's written now precludes it from residential. I prefer we leave it that way.
You just said you were all right with it on that basis.
I said that.
She said that.
I agree. I mean, I'm not picking a fight. I'm just trying to understand.
You're the one that brought it up at the last meeting. Why can't it be here? Why can't it be here? I'm comfortable with it not being in residential. So, and particularly single-family residences, because people have property rights. They have value. It could impact the sale of their house. It can impact a lot of things. I'm not in favor in residential, period. There's enough right-of-way, there's enough other places to put this without dealing with that issue.
How do you really feel?
Okay. Yeah, I guess I just don't get it. I don't.
And the table where we talk about the actual typing of the review, it actually, like for any of the low-density residential zones, it would require a conditional use permit. So that is a significant cost and process that they would have to go through, at which time the hearings examiner could hear arguments about the pros and cons. But ultimately, what this says is you can be in that neighborhood, but not on the residential structures themselves. So,
And that's the check and balance. By requiring a conditional use permit, that gives affected people the opportunity to go to a hearing examiner and express their opinion.
But the obvious way to do it would be in the street.
Sure, that makes sense. But I mean, if they're unsightly on private property, I don't know why they're not unsightly on public property.
There would be less unsightly in the public property because the city would have control of how it appeared. They wouldn't have.
You could have that control on private property as well.
So for example, if you had one on your house and you wanted to do some electrical work and you needed to turn off the breakers, your electrician couldn't do that because you would be in breach of your contract unless you get the wireless facility to come out and turn their breaker off. Whereas with Public Works, if they need to replace a light bulb on the light stand, they will turn the pole off. There's no power.
And we're not forcing anybody to go into business with these folks. I mean, it's not a huge deal. I don't think I don't understand why we want different rules for different zones here. But,
Well,
I guess I'm a lone voice here, so.
If in the future somebody comes and wants to put it on their residential and come and make a big issue of changing it,
Sure.
we could consider it then. Oh, sorry, yes, Mr. Perry.
If I had a flagpole in front of my yard,
You need
Microphone, please. We
to
can't
do
hear
the
you.
routine.
You can't be heard on the
I
tape.
talk pretty loud.
Yeah, but
Mine's just a general question. If I had a flagpole in my yard and I wanted to have one of these mounted on that, would that be allowable on private property?
So I would say the answer to that would be yes, with the conditional use permit, because the pole is not a residential structure.
And how many flagpoles can you have on your lot with an American flag on it? As many as you want.
As many as you can get a conditional use permit approved
Not for the flagpole. You can have as many flagpoles as you want.
Oh, yeah.
They need a conditional use permit.
Put the tower on, but once you've got one, how could you deny the others?
That's a great point.
And
they could
if it's an
apply.
outright allowed loose, the hearings examiner can't turn it down, he can only put conditions on it.
Yes, so what the hearings examiner would do is look at it for height and width, and that it is inside the pole, or the equipment is underground, or that it's camouflaged in accordance with the regulations. So, yeah. So
He
really,
couldn't turn it down as long as you met the code.
That is correct.
It'd be
But neither could I as a staff member,
Mhm.
so.
Okay, so
So that's fine.
we're going to leave it the way it is,
Okay.
not on structure use.
So we don't want it on anybody's house, but they can put it all over their flagpole.
What's that?
We don't want it on a house, but they can put it all over their flagpole.
Yes.
Sure. No counting for taste, I guess.
There's not. Next issue? Before-
So, this one is in section E on page 6 at the top, 1C. And Ms. Pabst pointed out that RFC interference with emergency vehicles or emergency services is actually governed by the federal regulations, and this section, which appears in the code twice, is old language that doesn't need to be there anymore. And what this section says is, if you're within a mile of some kind of emergency service provider, they need to get notice to make sure that there's no interference between, say, the fireman's radios and the cell tower. And what Ms. Pabst pointed out in that is, that's the whole purpose of the licenses that are issued, and the average fire chief would have no clue whether there was going to be a problem or not. Therefore, for us to create a local hurdle to something that's already considered in the licensing process
delete it.
is a waste of
So
time.
we just delete it. Okay. Since we're there, I want to say on the next page, which says 7 at the top, Part C, which is at the very top of page 7.
Yep.
I think you're missing a word out of there. I think in the last sentence, it should be identified as in section 17.17, shall be reviewed. Because I think you have shall in all the other ones.
Yes.
Well, there's a typo someplace else, I don't know who's responsible for typos.
Okay, so directly below that, in section D, is the other
Yeah,
instant that needs to be deleted.
right.
And so I will make the adjustments to the numbering based upon that deletion. Now, a couple paragraphs below that is paragraph 3 for signage. And sport towers and antennas shall not be used for signage, symbols, banners, or other devices or objects. Any emergency information, public safety warnings, or additional signage required by a governmental agency shall be displayed in an appropriate manner. The question that had occurred to me in that is, would it make sense for us to require them to label the operator and a contact for that individual operator? So that way, if it was a tower that had Verizon and T-Mobile, would it be, does it make sense for us to require like a customer service contact for each of those providers?
On each pole?
For each proposal, yes. So like we have cell towers out at Columbia River Carbonates area.
Right.
Would it be helpful, maybe for emergency services, to have a plaque on the side of the box that says T-Mobile and T-Mobile's contact number in case there's an emergency?
I don't see
Sounds
where it would
reasonable.
hurt. It seems,
So
I'm
you
in favor
can't
of
put
that.
banners on these things, like that means you can't use them as a flagpole?
They do label them anyway.
Yes. Well, and quite often it's yes, that's an interesting question. Are we talking pole provider or the actual operator of the antennas?
I mean, most, the phone company, everybody, they label their equipment already.
Yeah, I imagine that's for their own use though, and I think we're talking about if the city or somebody just strolling by needs to contact the players.
I think what I mean is that they have standardized signage, and you're probably putting a requirement on them now to meet our signage requirements, and so it would cause a duplication.
Well, and
For example, PUD labels their poles the same throughout the county. I don't think they want to make a red one instead of a yellow one, because Woodland wants a red one.
we could, rather than that prescriptive, we could simply require a operator contact number on all facilities, or even a contact information. That way, if they want to use the email instead of a phone number, or a website instead of a phone number.
And that would be used by emergency personnel or the general public?
Or the average person walking by, yep. So, I don't know that anybody else does it, but if we're not concerned, I mean, it doesn't need to be there. It's just one extra piece of equipment on the side of the building.
Well, this already says any emergency information, so you're talking about, that would be something different?
So that section is specifically for like emergency voltage and stuff like that, so that if there's a fire, any firemen going inside would know the potential hazards inside the structure. So if there's high voltage or batteries of a certain type that they know they might need respirators before entering a building or something.
I don't know, it seems reasonable to me to ask for contact information.
Well, is this something that, let's discuss briefly in emergency situation. Does the fire department or does the emergency response pretty much know the hazards associated with something like this?
I think it depends on the size and the scope. Like if you're at the base of a large tower, they might have a cinder block building with equipment in it. And it may specifically be a building because if there's an emergency generator, it's got to be big enough to house the generator and the diesel fuel to actually power the cell tower in an emergency. If we're talking a small cell tower and you're talking about those boxes that are, the size of a just the typical box, there's probably nothing in there that they need to be warned about.
So is that sign going to be up here at the top, or is it going to be down here at the street where you can see it? I just want to be clear. Where are you going to put the sign?
If somebody's walking by.
I mean, like, if you go to your panel in your home, it's going to say, here's the permit from the Department of Labor and Industries and call PUD. Now, it doesn't mean people are going to read them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're going to have all sorts of things about do not trespass and unauthorized, and this belongs to Verizon. And I'm like, seriously, where are you going to put it? Up there in the sky or down at the bottom?
Yeah, good point. It might only be applicable for ground-mounted equipment.
And if you're not going to do it on all of them.
Yeah, and not all of them. And it is written currently in a way that says any emergency information required by the government agency. Typically, that wouldn't be required.
So if the planner decided it was required, you could add it.
Yeah, so maybe that's not somewhere you want to go. It does sound dumb now that now that you talk it through for me.
Okay. So,
Okay, so moving on to section F. So, just at the top of the next page, section 2, or I'm sorry, section 2 of subsection 1. Tower heights listed above may be increased if 80% of the final proposed tower is screened. So up here on the board, I have some suggested language that should be added to that. So this section specifically is talking about if it's behind a hill or if it's on a wooded lot and the trees are 60 feet tall, you might never notice, or the trees are 100 feet tall. You might never notice a tower, but it's got to be higher than the trees to actually function properly. But, of course, the danger, of course, is they'll put in an extra tall tower and then cut down all the trees, and then it'll stick out like a sore thumb. So my suggestion is that screening shall be permanent in nature. It may be accomplished by topography, vegetation, or other approved means, provided a preservation easement or other tool can ensure its ongoing screening value. So that way, you can't clear cut after the pole is approved.
I like the idea of the other approved means and other tool. Seems a little too ambiguous. Is that, is that referring to something in particular, or was that just sort of?
It's for what I can't think of right now, because it might start out as a forested lot but end up as a tall tower that's the exact same height as the trees, and maybe it's a water tower, and it serves the same function.
Okay, so they can't add more than 20 feet, but in a non-residential district, they can be 120 feet. So their maximum height is 140 feet.
So that subsection 2 is kind of a safety valve, so if they wanted to go higher than the 120 feet, that they could request that.
So how high could they go?
Well, if you grow 300-foot trees around it.
So they could request.
There's not a lot, we don't have that many redwoods here.
Yes, so they could request a variance, because this is a bulk and a dimensional standard that they would be able to apply for a variance for. So yeah, so if it was around let's take a water tower, for example. So if a water tower was built and it was 110 feet tall, and they wanted to put an antenna on the top of a water tower, theoretically, they couldn't because the height is prohibitive. This would give them the option of saying, yes, we're over the height limit, but given the circumstances, 140 feet makes sense because it's a 130-foot water tower, and it makes sense for us to have it at the top where we get the clearest height and vision.
And it's screened just because of geometry? Or is it part of it?
If we were to ever
Geography.
annex into Clark County in that tall hillside across the CC Street Bridge, that's, I don't know I don't know if there's a situation where we could.
So
have
the
it-
200-foot towers that are up there, they could go another 100 feet tall? They couldn't, but,
They could apply for a variance, and if they could argue that 80% of that height is screened, yes.
so there is no height limit. To answer my question, there's no limit on the height they can go.
Yes. But that's the function of the variance process. That's absolutely true. There's no height limit in a residential zone because you could get a variance to do something outrageous.
So it's not, it doesn't, you need to specify like what screen means, like what vantage point it's screened from? That's from one.
Because of the variance process, they would have to show that it meets variance criteria, which includes impacts to neighboring properties. So that would be part of the discussion.
So they could go on the bridge over the Lewis River and say, can we put a tower off the top? I'm trying to think of something that's permanent in nature that they could go off of that exists.
Yeah, so let's assume, for the sake of saying, we annex into Clark County across on the other side of the CC Bridge. The farther we go, I'm sure that hill has a downside. So if you were the very farthest corner behind the hill, you might need 200 feet for it to even see over the hill and serve woodland.
But then we're back to talking about more, any sort of old school cell towers. I don't know. I don't think those folks need help.
Yeah, you could even delete this entire section because you're not interested in taller towers. Just because they're screened doesn't necessarily mean you want taller towers.
What's wrong with, I mean, if the topography or geography determines it's appropriate, what's wrong with that? I mean, I'm just trying to.
Well, at a certain height, don't we have to put a little red light on top of it?
Yes, and the requirements
So if
in
your
here-
neighbor puts up 100, if the light pole out in front of your yard is now 150 feet tall with a little red light on it, and then the next utility light down the street has a little, and, I mean, 150 feet, 120 feet, you're getting pretty dang tall. You're taller than almost any tree in the city of Woodland. I mean, we cut down a tree that was 120 feet, and, I mean, it was like 90 years old. I don't think there's a lot of 90-year-old fir trees in Woodland, city limits.
So you're proposing that, I mean.
That there be a top, that there be a height, an altitude that we don't go above. And you're going screen it to 80 feet, but at the top of it, they put those little red lights on the one that goes across the freeway on Alaska or someplace, and it freaks me out in the middle of the night. It's like, there's an airplane landing straight into your car. But there you go, oh, okay, it's just the lights on the cell tower, I'm safe. And I'm going like, that's basically what you're going to have up Lewis River Road. Isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, so the taller you go, the more likely you are to get into an FAA lighting situation. And then at that point, it's going to be a whole nother level of crazy.
So we want to cap the height.
I was like, how tall is it going? And I don't hear that there's a limit.
Yes, so my concern, having reread this again after not having looked at it for a while, is Section 2 was incomplete because it didn't define under what you were concerned about when it talks to that screening standard. So what I proposed puts some kind of sideboards that they have to ensure that the screening is there in perpetuity. The answer might be just to eliminate that section, and it's a safety valve that you don't want available. If you want to put in an ultimate height limit, like in the section above, that would be fine as well. Having reread it, I'm concerned that it's an incomplete statement and it opens the door to a bunch of problems.
Do you know the height of the new poles they're putting along Lewis River Highway?
In Cowlitz County, I do not.
inside city limits of Woodland. They
Oh.
just replaced a bunch of poles along Lewis River Road between the substation.
I do not. It might
I
be-
would guess they were 80 feet.
Might be in the right-of-way permit, but I haven't seen it.
Scott, do you have a guess on the height of those poles? I would guess they're 80 feet.
I would say something right in that area, yeah.
Mhm. And do you know FAA rules? At what point do you have to light something?
So they have to be a lot taller than that.
Yeah,
So
but,
I want to say 200 is the minimum.
I wouldn't think.
If I remember correctly, 200 is the minimum, and then you start getting into the question of blinking versus steady, and there are regulations about how quickly it may blink. And I went through that entire process in Juneau, Alaska, because Juneau is a valley, and wherever you put the pole, everybody can see it for miles in both directions. So nobody wanted it lit, but Juneau Airport is, everybody flies past the mountains to land at the airport. And so it was this giant battle about whether or not it needed a light. And the FAA is like, these are the standards, there's no deviation, and if it's triggered, it's triggered. If it's not, we won't make them put it.
something about no higher than the standard utility pole in the city limits. I really don't know if you have more experience with this.
Well, I'm trying to think when the Troutdale project was in permitting. I think those new towers, I mean, like if you're down at the Ross project, I mean, what are those towers, 210 feet? The new huge transmission towers, they're like
transmission
200 feet, right? They're great camouflage and they're permanent. You wouldn't know there was a cell tower's mast on them, but, and you've got the substation by the high school, the substation on Lewis River Road. And I would guess the transmission lines on that right-of-way are 100 feet or more. I would guess they're at least 120 feet.
Now, this section specifically for Section B is for new towers. So that wouldn't apply to co-locations. That would specifically apply to new towers that are being put up, like the more traditional big facilities.
So non-residential districts, there's kind of capped at 150 feet.
Yes.
Unless it's screened. And residential districts, capped at 100 feet.
Yes.
Well, it can be increased if 80% is screened.
So that means you'd have to have
Yeah.
80 foot of something else screening it, 80 foot or more of something else screening it.
And now,
Which was the start of the question is, what do you want for screening? Cactuses.
And really,
It's just
as you talk through it, there's really no situation in Woodland where you would be able to screen a tall tower to 80% of the tower, because there's nothing in town that's 80 feet tall or taller. So this is literally, makes more sense for us to just delete this section than actually
I'm
try
in
and...
favor of cutting it
try and fix it.
if we annex into Clark County at some point. Then
So are we talking about deleting how much? Like all of F? or
just two.
Just two?
That section there.
Okay.
So you establish height limits, and they are what they are.
Okay.
Okay.
So we established height limits and we didn't require screening.
So, not of the tower itself. There is screening and landscaping required of ground equipment. And the screening, actually, we're getting to...
But we're going back to the design element, the gray powder coating, blah, blah, blah thing, right?
And I think that's the next section, yes.
It has to have new support tower applications that it's being screened. It's page 16 of the code.
And
Page 8.
So the next section under height is setbacks, and then the next section under that, section 3, is landscaping and screening, where I did have some suggested or some questions for landscaping and screening. Specifically, if you look at letter C, 3C, for landscaping, all new support towers and associated structures shall be fully enclosed within a minimum 6-foot-high gated and locked security fence. If you're up at the Taco Bell and you're waiting in line and you look across the street, there are 2 6-foot chain link fences that are the metallic gray with concertina wire on the top of them, and they totally look out of place. One of them, actually I think both of them are for like gas infrastructure for the gas line. And it immediately made me realize that, do we really want the gray chain link fence? So, or chain link with slats, which is probably the most god-awful screening ever invented.
Oh, I love the one where they've got the green fuzzy slats. That's so nice.
So, do we want to add something about it required maybe a green vinyl chain link fence that's covered with that green vinyl or the black vinyl, so that at least it's not as embarrassingly noticeable?
No concertina wire. Okay, so I'm going to ask the question here. So I'm Verizon or Singular, and you want to make me have trees and bushes around my fence. So now I go to get in the gate so I can access my equipment, and I can't get there because there's a bush in the way.
So we wouldn't make it install in front of the gate.
Okay,
But-
I mean, but that's going to be their comment next.
And I'll fight that battle when I get there.
I like black chain link.
There's nothing about this says chain link, right?
This is one tree, yeah,
Yeah, trees, evergreens.
fully enclosed with minimum 6-foot-high gated and locked security fence.
Which doesn't say,
Yeah, chain link fence that's black, covered in the black plastic. Yeah. Greens, you know, if you're in a vegetated area, green might not be as bad, but I think the gray sticks out no matter what you put it against. So, on the fly, I think I would modify this to say, shall be enclosed with a minimum 6-foot-high gated locked security fence that is either green or black. Coated, chain link? Oh.
I mean, I don't,
Well, if it's behind shrubs, I guess it doesn't really matter what color it is.
Our maximum fence.
Well, I think
These are just for the big ones, right?
yeah, new big towers. I mean, specifically requiring chain links, like what if they just, in occasion they'll put like a masonry wall or something around these things?
I don't think they can do a masonry wall. I think they have to do chain link.
You know, why do we want to require, I'd rather look at a masonry wall than no matter what color you make a chain link fence.
And it will eventually be screened by either the landscaping or the screening that's required. So it might only be a temporary issue, whereas the gas pipeline station is going to look like that forever. Unless we get an enterprising Eagle Scout who wants to do a public service of planting some vegetation around it. So you want to leave that to me to
Yeah.
craft some language?
Do you mean scrub, or do you mean shrub?
Shrub, yes, thank you. Okay, so the next guidance I needed from you was, there were two table formats. The one that was in the text, it's the larger version, and then the very last page of the handout included kind of a shorter version.
So which one do you see as causing the fewer problems?
Actually, the one that's in the text.
I mean, it's not so wacky and convoluted that it's a problem. Yeah.
And are you okay with the language that I added to kind of add emphasis to the fact that small cell nodes are in the third column? So it's these two footnotes which refer to small cell nodes on city-owned structures or poles.
Yep.
Okay? So I will delete that last paragraph. Last of my notes. So, if you could look at Mary D. Papp's email. If you look at her email, the second bullet talks about clarification of what the RF specialist provides and what the structural engineer provides. What the ordinance says is that the structural engineer would have to verify that the structure itself is adequate to hold the weight of any additional equipment that's added to the tower. And the RF person is only responsible for the radio frequency analysis. That's what it currently says, and I think she just wanted confirmation that that's what I was driving at.
Two different technical specialties.
Yeah. The only thing I could think of is maybe a clarification in the submittal standards, because the clarification might be interpreted as there's one person who needs to provide both information, and there may not be enough structural engineers out there who can do the RF work. I would never turn somebody away if they had two signed letters instead of one. So I don't know if that's micromanaging or not, but I don't think we would realistically require it to be the same person. The third bullet is we suggest allowing multifamily and mixed-use buildings to support structures.
We already did that.
I think this gets to the conversation we already had, and we hashed that out
Yes.
in the, and
I thought we were going to do it by code. We were going to say, I'm sorry, I thought that you were going to change it so that we weren't going to allow in the single-family residential code that we're only going to allow in multifamily and high density.
Let's look at,
Because you mentioned single family and duplex, but you have, so you could put it on that triplex.
Well, our zoning code, we have the low density, medium density, and high density, which is all really single-family residential code. And then we have multifamily, we have two, we have high and medium, which are almost identical, but it would seem like we would only allow it in the multifamily areas. That doesn't, and then the C1 zone, we allow residential, but that's mixed use. And none of it's single family. Well, except for pre-existing single family, but.
so going back to the definition, it says support structures do not include support towers or any building or structure used for residential purposes. Maybe what I should just do is add in the low-density residential districts. That way, in the high density, it opens the door if they can get a conditional use permit.
That's what I thought you were doing.
Sorry? Oh. Her fourth bullet, we already removed those two paragraphs she was referring to. And then that last one is just more of an information about stuff that's available. The one thing I did think that she brought up, and that is at the very last line on her second page, this is the town of, jurisdiction is that? Linwood, City of Linwood, section 2190-280 for eligible facilities requests and procedures. This one is referring to what the industry calls the shot clock regulations, which basically means that if you're doing wireless facilities, you only have 60 days. It doesn't matter what your process is, and if you don't process it in time, it gets approved as proposed. No ifs, ands, or buts. City has no say. So basically, it is designed to guarantee them a decision within 60 days, whether there are problems or not.
Even if there are problems on their end.
So the responsibility would be for staff to identify those problems before you get to the end of the 60 days, and so it puts all the pressure on city to expedite these permits. So it's
Over other priorities?
Yeah, it's 60 days, clock
yes,
runs.
Yes, you have 60 days, and it's a race as soon as it comes in.
Is it 60 days from the date the application is deemed complete?
No, from the date the application
Well, that's
is
ridiculous.
submitted. Yes, and that's what this specifically language says, is the applicant has to agree to, I forget what the term they use, but it was essentially created to prevent communities from just putting it on the shelf and never processing a permit. And that's kind of how it originally, started, is it would just take them forever to get applications. But the term they're talking about is, so you're now talking section C and C1. So it includes language from the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations that govern this.
So do you only get one shot So if you say you're missing this, this, and this, and so you get 30 days to review the permit for completeness. You miss that, and they send another set of docs, do you get another 30 days to review the new set of docs? I mean,
I don't think so.
yeah, I don't think it's ever a good idea to let somebody else write your code on, they get a free ride.
Yes, so it concerns me, but on the other hand, just because it's not in our ordinance doesn't mean that I don't have to follow it. Because I could be processing our permit, issue them a decision on day 16.
Oh, you get 10 days.
16.
Second time around, you get 10 days.
Oh, does it say that in there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not completely familiar with this, but I completely understand the point she's making, and that is, it would be helpful to be in the code so that anybody reading this understands what the standards are. Because if I'm not paying attention and it goes over the deadline, that's my own fault. And if it's because I don't read all the CFRs, I read the city code, but I don't read the state, the federal regulations.
But it's City of Linwood.
It's not right out of, but it's basically what their attorney approved for the city of Linwood.
How
Which-
great is that? Yeah, do other
But it's
places
the
do
same federal regulation. It's the same rules I have to follow.
So it is out of the CFR.
It may
No.
not be word for word, but it's,
I got a question.
yeah.
How far along in this process are we? I mean, like, how many more changes do you want to talk about?
Well,
I only ask because I really need to use the bathroom.
so we are at the end, and we're just going through the last two
All right.
documents, so.
Well, I think we should take a break.
All right, in that case, I'm going to move that we recess for a couple minutes.
I think
Okay, do we need to vote on it? Move to recess.
health and welfare comes first.
Okay, we are in recess.
Yes, that code language?
Yeah.
There's nothing to do, there's nothing to do. What changes do you propose?
She's just saying that to meet FCC, meet federal requirements, Lynn would put this into their code.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And we can say, we'll meet federal requirements, and it's the same thing. No?
Did you call us back together, back in this?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. So we will resume the meeting now. Thank you.
So to pick up where we were before the break, my suggestion would be, if you want this added, that we add it under section G, which is our process section. And so that way, it just simply lays out what the timeline expectations are for processing these permits.
And
Now, the other thing you could do is you could direct me to pass these by the city attorney and provide his recommendation to go with your recommendation up to the city council. That way you don't necessarily have to make sure it's legal. You can direct him to make sure it's legal and to advise the city council accordingly.
so would you just be copying the code that's here from Linwood, or pretty much?
Yeah. Cut and paste our name, because theoretically the CFR timelines
Yeah.
are all going to be applicable.
Have you personally looked at the CFR references?
I have not.
Well,
And I could do that?
I think you
Verify.
really do that. And I have no,
And maybe go ahead and run it by the lawyer. That's,
So-
This is one of those things that came up in email today.
So, does the Linwood provision to change the 60 days to 30 days, plus you've got 10 days to comply, plus we start again, I mean, if it's federal requirement, it doesn't matter what Linwood says. They have to meet the federal requirements. So, this may not be, even be applicable anyway. It might be, but it might not be.
Yeah.
That's why I think he needs to read it and research and figure out what that.
Or just leave it alone and say, they all know what the rules are. The only person you're putting on notice is the city of Woodland.
But that does have some value.
Yeah. So you could add another subsection in G that basically says the city agrees, the city will process its permits in accordance with 47
Yeah.
CFR.
That's what I would do.
It seems simpler than
Yeah,
trying
it
to
seems
paraphrase
easier
it.
It does.
Than writing a whole lot of.
But I urge you to remember.
Yes, and I'll go through that and make sure it's perfect. And that's less important because for adopting the ordinance, if we're referring to the CFR,
Right.
yeah, whatever the CFR says, I'm obligated.
Well, and you don't have an opinion that the Linwood ordinance is correct. You just have notice of it.
A recommendation, yes,
Yeah.
theoretically from attorney. And I know.
But she's not advising you.
No, she's not. Well, she recommended that we adopt something like, and then provided their language because she's used it. She is an attorney licensed in Washington, and I've known her long enough that I trust her to not direct me to do something that isn't the right thing to do. But, yeah. Like I said, I would still refer it to Frank and talk to him and make sure that he concurs that it's the best legal option for the city. So I can do that, and I'll provide Frank's recommendation to the city council when it goes to the city council. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to get through.
Okay. So then, I guess we make a motion to send this,
Well, you had something about you wanted a purpose statement.
Oh,
that's
yes.
true, yeah.
Thank you.
Like the purpose is because Travis said so. Does that work?
So, protect the health, safety, and welfare of the city of the residents of the city of Woodland is kind of the standard statement. Do you want to do that? You don't have to adopt a purpose statement.
Yeah, is it necessary? Because it's pretty, with all this language here, it seems pretty self-evident for this.
I think you always have a purpose statement. I mean, it's always like, well, we're doing this because we have a requirement to provide for the health and safety of the community.
So if we're gonna do a purpose statement, just go with what you say is the,
Yeah.
as you say, the standard sort of thing.
Standard minimum.
Okay.
Yeah, minimum, yeah.
Okay. Want me to draft maybe something now while you have a chance to read it and comment?
Sure.
Yeah, what's the purpose statement of the industrial code?
So the light industrial district, I-1, is a zoning classification providing for light manufacturing and fabrication, warehousing and storage, construction, contracting operations, so it's kind of uninspiring,
And a little specific.
yeah. So there, and some sections just don't have any. There's a scope and application for performance standards, but they're hit and miss depending on how they were adopted, and if they were part of a long code update, each section didn't get a purpose, but.
Questions? How come we decided not to say words?
This is his computer, so I don't know why. Oh, because we log on, it's the public work computer, and it's a public work sign-on. I guess nobody's just gotten in and,
I think it should change. It's the wrong wording.
Okay, well, I'll change my opinion and say, let's delete the purpose statement.
okay.
If any, Tal wanted to do that from the beginning.
Okay, so I will make that change and renumber accordingly.
Okay.
And then I will go through and any cross-references, change those as necessary, based upon our changes today.
Okay, so then are we ready to make a motion to send this on to the city council?
Technically, if you could you make sure that you hold the audience and then close the public hearing portion of the testimony?
Okay. We will now open the public comment period for this proposed code. Are there any comments from the public?
No comment.
Okay.
Came to learn.
So I guess we will close the public comment period. Okay. All right, do I have a motion then to send this on to the city council with the changes that we have been making?
Can I ask a question here that's outside of what you just asked? Aren't we supposed to go through this whole thing like, you know, declare that we don't have any ex parte communication and all that nonsense?
Yes, I guess you were supposed to.
Aren't we supposed to have a script that we're following for public hearings?
Yes, so we will add that to the package so that when we get here, there'll be one line on your counter.
Well, there's still time, we haven't voted yet.
What's that?
There's still time, we haven't voted yet.
So do we want to go through that now before
I
we vote?
declare I haven't had any communication with anybody about anything to do with wireless.
I mean, aren't we supposed to do something? Aren't we supposed to make declarations?
Yes. So, technically, Sharon, you should probably ask if there is anything anybody wants to declare.
Okay.
Because you haven't made motions yet, so.
Does anyone want to declare any kind of communication on this subject?
No.
No? No? Okay.
You ready now?
We'll get this all down someday. Yes, I guess, ready for a motion?
So I would move that we pass the code on to city council as changed, and once it's passed by, I guess we're just, does the attorney need to be involved anymore if we're just going to reference the?
No, I don't think so, because you just asked me to adopt it by reference.
All right, fantastic. In that case, pass it on to city council as it stands with a couple of, some editing. As an addition. That was a really great motion.
You
Some of
want
my
to try
finest-
again?
Finest work there. I move that we pass this on to city council as amended.
Second? Is there any second? Okay, seconded by Connie. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm just appalled. I'll vote, I mean, we should be recommending that they approve it. We're supposed to send a recommendation that they approve or deny. Yeah.
Yes. And I took it forward for approval is what I understood.
I am writing the motion as forward the code on to city council for approval as amended. Is that what you wish?
Well, that's what it should be. So then I'll go aye.
Okay, so we have unanimous approval. Aye. Okay, so next section on the agenda is the staff reports, 2018 work plan and schedule.
So a revised DRC meeting notes checklist was sent in today, so I've been revising those about every couple weeks and sending them along to you. So if you have any questions about those, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But permitting activity as expected. Any questions?
You usually tell us who you are, and I understand, I see what's going on.
Yes.
Have we considered outsourcing some elements of this to keep you on track and keep code?
So that suggestion has come from a couple places. There has been a suggestion that we hire a consultant to rewrite the code. There also has been a suggestion that we hire a consultant to do some outreach and education for the update of the comprehensive plan. Neither one of those are in my budget, but it is an ongoing conversation among the elected officials as to whether or not that is an option. So at this point, there's no budget for it, so.
Well, so we can discuss this. I will move that the city council get a recommendation from planning commission that the money be found to hire a consultant to either draft, to take over the work list. I just think we have to let council know that we cannot do our job if you can't do yours.
Yeah, one of the suggestions that I came up with, and that is, because there's only Janice and I at the front counter, that having additional planning help to be able to work the counter and process permits so that I can focus on the long-range stuff was also part of the conversation.
So what's your strong suit? Because, maybe you have more than one, but, you can do all this work. So I would like you to focus on what you do best. And I've heard good things about you doing it. I've heard positive.
Yeah, to be honest, the hardest thing that I have to deal with is finding the time to concentrate on doing something well. So I tend, there are days when I just go from customer to customer to customer at the counter, and they're all extremely happy because they get great customer service, but I never actually get any of my existing workload done. And
I'm very concerned
yeah.
about, our mission, our objective was to get the finance and financial code
Yeah.
updated, and that's important.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're saying because I haven't had a chance to talk about it. That's part of the reason why if you're familiar with Anindita, who was the lady who did the downtown revitalization support, she and I have been having a conversation about her potential ability to help do some of the long-range stuff has been discussed. Then also Brad, who was the part-time guy and is familiar with the code, is also another example of somebody that could be brought in to help doing some of the manual permit review while I do the outreach and customer service at the front counter. So I'm exploring options.
Are you open to suggestions
we're not going to meet our objectives. It's impossible. It's June.
Yeah. Well, the discussion that we're going to have to start very soon is driven by the fact that we have 5 requests to update the comprehensive plan, and, you know, once I have the opportunity to start doing an analysis of what our residential needs are, it's going to directly lead and feed into that conversation of how our code does or doesn't encourage residential development. And one way or the other, we'll be having that conversation. It may not be dedicated to residential, but it may be more couched in an argument of we need residential development and we need to develop something that encourages people to do it. So that conversation is coming, but it may not be as early as we expected. It may be part of a bigger discussion about comprehensive plan.
Will our permit fees up?
So,
Sorry, Scott.
I talked to the finance committee today, and it will be going to city council. I believe it's the first meeting of next month. And they will be talking about increasing fees. I've requested a modest fee, but not enough that would cover an additional planner or a consultant, depending on how much they get hired to do.
We have to be very conscious about, we want to encourage development. So there have already been some large, $5,000 just for schools alone. But these are, so you have to take that into consideration when we do investments.
Yep, I did.
Don't
So,
drag people away.
so I provided them with 3 potential models. I did some calculations of an across-the-board increase of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25%, and gave them an estimate of what that meant for dollars. I also did a model where I estimated how much time it actually takes us to process a permit, and then attach that to the rate of pay for an average employee and calculated a fee. And then the other version is I compared Woodland to La Center, Kalama, Ridgefield, Clark County, Cowlitz County, and compared similar applications. So what does a subdivision cost here versus Kalama versus Kelso versus Clark County and Cowlitz County, and figured out where we fall. And pretty consistently, like 70 to 90% of our fees are lower than any of the local jurisdictions that are around. Some of them are lower by $5, some of them are lower by, $2,000, depending on what kind of application you're talking about. I then went in and did an analysis of how many of those applications we actually get. So we might charge $1,000 less than Kalama or Kelso, but we never get any of those applications. So jacking up the fee on something that we never processed doesn't make sense. Whereas other things like floodplain, we charge $100 for that review, and if it costs me $300 to actually process the application, should we charge $300, or maybe Clark County charges $600? So I put forth some of that conversation, and we'll see what the city council does with it.
But we add consultant fee. I mean, we have an additional fee on our permits where we outsource their building permits and we add the cost of that. We have that open-ended feature,
Yes,
which
that is-
those other communities don't.
Yes, they do.
On certain, but not on all.
On certain things and some. Yeah, so like a public hearing, if it requires a hearings examiner, they have to reimburse us for that cost. Same as Clark County and all other jurisdictions pretty much do that. So yes, so I specifically, when I did this analysis, I only compared apples to apples and oranges
Okay.
to oranges, so.
Was that all the applications, though, not building permits?
So I did land use, building, and a little bit of impact fee, but that was just mostly for conversation purposes, not because they're talking about changing impact fees. On the building side of the house, it's a little more structured because the IBC, the International Building Code, and the well, so it's actually the code council is the one that sets, they have kind of a standard form, and it's, yes, the International Code Council kind of develops a standard formula, and then the cities can decide how much per $1,000 they want to use, but it's kind of a structured thing, and we're, again, probably in the lower 25 percentile of all of the local jurisdictions for building fees. But part of that is just because we have a small building department, and now we actually don't have anybody on staff for building. So yeah, all of that is factored into it, and we'll see what the city council does. I think right now, like on the planning side of the house, we're recovering about 36 to 38 cents on the dollar. So the rest of it is subsidized by tax dollars or building fees.
On building fees?
No, it's general fund money is supporting the building department.
But you're lump summing planning duties that the city's required to do in the cost of a planner and saying permits should pay for that. That's not the requirement.
Yes. Yep, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
When you're
I mean-
talking- yeah. So,
We're supposed to do planning, we're not required to issue permits.
yeah. So actually, I think the numbers are closer to about 18% when you calculate that in which case the general fund is subsidizing 82% of my department.
But your duties are to provide for planning, not to provide permits.
Yes.
So it should switch the other
Well,
way.
It's both. Because I spend less time specifically on fees, therefore the dollars go farther. So they covered 38% of my fee time.
But how much of your time are you spending on permits?
So,
Because what you're saying is I don't have time to do planning
well,
because of the permit load. And we're saying that's our concern, is that we need the planning assistance. And the city should be providing for permits.
yes. Yeah, so what was your question?
Well, your numbers, I'm like, if the city doesn't get a permit all year, that doesn't affect the fact that they need planning.
Yes.
And if city council needs that pointed out, I'm like, we should point it out to them. You've
So-
tasked Travis to plan, and you haven't provided funding for him to do this other part of his job, which is taking over what you hired him to do.
Yes. So when we're talking about just working on fees and permits and customer service, 38% of that work is paid by fees. When you throw in all the other stuff like what we're doing this now,
Mhm.
it actually drops down to 18% is covered because my fee revenue has not changed, but my workload has. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think what I'm saying is it's immaterial. Planning should be paid for whether there are any fees or not.
Right,
'Cause
he
this-
he was talking about making adjustments to I think
Yes.
his reasoning for giving those percentages.
Do you
Yes.
have a motion?
I did, but it didn't get seconded.
Second, I second the motion.
I'm sorry, what was the motion?
That we should tell city council
yeah.
to give him funding to figure out how to pay for planning.
Not yet.
I can restate that. I move that we pass,
Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
yeah, I move that as a body, we recommend to the city council that they find funding for planning to provide for long-range planning and short-term planning for the city of Woodland, so we can do what they ask us to do.
To meet our agenda.
Yes.
I second.
Connie, yeah.
So I went into the city of Ridgefield planning calendar a week ago, and if we use that as a harbinger of what's to come, I mean, there's no way the city of Woodland can cope unless they get additional assistance for the planner. I mean, I think they had 20 plats going. And I think they had another 15 commercial applications. And that was in addition to their residential. Those were plats.
For,
City of Ridgefield.
yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I did is I threw in some numbers to my analysis that include, it's a snapshot of our impact fees for the last 5 years and Ridgefield's impact fees for the last 5 years. Because theoretically, if something like Aho project were to come along, our next 5 years may look very much like Ridgefield's last 5 years. And the implications of how quickly we, we're unprepared and would be thrown under the bus and what we're missing by not being prepared. It's a very relevant part of the conversation, so.
Okay, got the motion?
I believe so. Let me read it back. June Jones moved, and Connie Taylor seconded that we recommend the city council find funding for the planning work that needs to be done in the city of Woodland. Is that
Close enough.
close?
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor of this motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Stay.
Do we have anything more to discuss? Do we have a motion to adjourn then? Okay, we have a motion to adjourn,
Second.
which is seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
We can do a meeting about the Six Rivers bike path.
Making progress?
Well, they don't have a very ambitious.
No, sir. It is not.
That's a good idea.
Oh, so it's like a committee working on this?
Yes, the